The bells of St. Margaret's at Holcombe had not yet stopped ringing when the chapel doors crashed open, and Marigold Ashcombe forgot how to breathe. She had been speaking the words. She had been speaking them for what felt like hours, though only seconds had passed since the bishop began the binding lines. Her hand was already inside another man's hand. Her voice had already shaped the first syllable of a vow she had sworn she would never utter. And then, the great oak doors at the back of the long stone aisle slammed against the walls behind them, and every head in the congregation turned, and the bishop fell silent, and the ringing in her ears became the only sound in the world. She knew before she looked. She had known the shape of his stride since she was 19 years old. Theron Ravenscar, Duke of Marchwood, stood in the open doorway with rain still sliding from the shoulders of his black traveling coat. He had ridden hard. She could see it in the dark stains across his boots, in the flush along the line of his jaw, in the way his chest rose and fell once, twice, before he found her standing at the altar in cream silk and pearls she had not chosen. His gray eyes locked on hers across the length of the chapel, and the world tilted sideways, and Marigold felt her knees forget how to hold her up. She had written to him for 7 months. 7 months of letters that had never been answered. 7 months of waking before dawn and waiting for the post. She knew now, with the slow, cold certainty of a woman who has just understood she has been deceived, that the letters had never reached him. He had not abandoned her. He had simply not known. "Continue," her father said from the front pew, his voice low and brittle. "Bishop, continue." The bishop hesitated. 200 guests filled the chapel, and every single one of them was watching the Duke who had not been invited. The man beside Marigold, Sir Crispin Folksworth of Grey Linden Hall, did not turn his head. He stood very still beside her, his fingers tightening on hers in a way that was almost gentle and almost not. "Bishop," her father said again. Marigold's voice came out without her permission. "Wait." Every head turned to her. Her mother, sitting white-faced in the second pew, made a small sound. Her father's shoulders went rigid. "Wait," Marigold said again, and the word was steadier now. "I cannot. Please, I cannot. Not until he—" "Daughter." Her father rose. "Finish. Father, please." Theron had begun to walk, not quickly. He came down the long aisle the way men walk when they know that running would only make a watching crowd cruel. He stopped 6 paces from the altar. He did not look at Sir Crispin. He did not look at her father. He looked only at her, and his voice when it came was quiet and very controlled, and the chapel heard every syllable. "Miss Ashcombe, forgive my arrival. I rode through the night from Aberdeen, and I have only this hour learned of this wedding." Sir Crispin's hand tightened further on hers. "Your Grace," her father said. His voice had found its iron again. "This is a private occasion. You will withdraw. I will not." The chapel made one collective sound, a small intake of breath that traveled along the pews like wind through grass. Sir Crispin finally turned his head, and Marigold saw at last the expression she had been refusing to look at since the carriage arrived that morning. He was not surprised. He was angry, and beneath the anger, something colder watched her, and she realized that her husband-to-be had been waiting for this moment for some time. "Marigold," Theron said, "did you write to me?" She could not answer. "Did you write to me?" He took 1 step closer. "I will not ask twice. I am asking you only because every word of your answer will decide what I do next." "Yes," she said. The chapel exhaled. "How many times?" 11, she whispered. Theron's jaw moved once. He looked then, only then, at her father, and she understood that her father had just lost a battle he did not yet know he had been fighting. "Bishop, I will require a moment with the bride, alone, before any further word of this ceremony is spoken." "Out of the question," her father said. "Sir Crispin." Theron's voice did not change. "You are a gentleman of reputation. You will permit your bride one private conversation before you bind her to you for life. Or you will tell every soul in this chapel why you will not." It was beautifully done. 200 witnesses who would carry every word into every drawing room in 3 counties. Sir Crispin could refuse and be branded a man who feared his own bride's voice, or he could agree and let her go. 5 minutes, Sir Crispin said. His voice was perfectly even. "In the vestry. The door will remain open." "Granted," Theron said. He held out his hand to her. An open palm offered, the way a man offers his hand to someone who is drowning. Marigold let go of Sir Crispin's fingers. She did not look at her husband-to-be. She did not look at her father. She crossed the small distance to the man she had loved since the summer she was 19, and she placed her hand in his, and his fingers closed around hers, and she felt his pulse hammering through the leather of his glove. The vestry door did not quite close behind them. Through the gap, she could see the upturned faces of 200 guests, and the white knuckles of her husband-to-be, and the blank fury of her father, and somewhere in the back row, a woman in a dark blue cloak, whose hood she could not see beneath. The woman was not weeping. The woman was watching. Theron turned to her, and the controlled mask he had worn down the aisle finally cracked, and he said her name once, very quietly, like a man who had not been certain he would ever say it again. And then he said something she did not expect. "Marigold, there is no time. I need you to listen to me very carefully, because what I am about to ask of you will cost you everything you have ever been told to value, and I have no right to ask it, and I am asking anyway." The vestry smelled of wax and old stone. A single candle burned on the side table beside a stack of folded linen, and the rain rattled against the small, high window. "Speak quickly," Marigold said. "We have less time than they will give us." "I know." Theron drew breath. "Your letters never reached me. Not one. I was in Scotland from August. I returned to London 4 days ago. I went to your father's house in Brook Street. The footman told me you were in the country, and nothing else. I rode here on a tip from a woman I do not know, who left a note at my club this morning. The note said only, 'St. Margaret's at Holcombe, 11 o'clock. She does not want him.' That is everything I know. Now tell me the rest." She told him. She told him in fragments, because there was no time for Grace, her father's debts, which she had only learned of in October, the visit from Sir Crispin in November, the arrangement her father had made before she was even consulted, the dowry that did not exist and was being replaced with her person, the letters she had written to Theron in secret, sealed and given to a maid she now understood had been her father's creature, her mother's silence, the decision, made for her in a study she had not been permitted to enter, that she would marry Sir Crispin Foxworth before the end of February, or her family would be ruined by the spring. Theron listened without speaking. When she finished, he closed his eyes for one long moment. "What do you know of him?" "He is 42, a widower. 2 estates. He lost his first wife in childbed 8 years ago. He has no living children. He—" She stopped. "What?" "He frightens me. I do not know why." "Trust that," Theron said. "Always trust that." He paced 2 steps and stopped. "Marigold, I cannot stop this wedding." She felt the floor move beneath her. "Listen, if I take you out of this chapel today, your father will be ruined within the week. Your mother will be turned out of doors. Your brother will be pulled from his college, and Sir Crispin will pursue you across England, with the law on his side and his money behind him. He will find you. He will take you back, and he will be a man publicly humiliated by a duke, and he will make you pay for that for the rest of your life. I have prosecuted 3 of them in the Lords. Then why are you here? Because there is another way, and it is worse than the wedding, and it is the only way I can see. And you must decide in the next 4 minutes whether you will trust me. Tell me. You will marry him. The candle flame guttered. You will marry him today, and you will go to Greylinden Hall as his wife. You will be polite. You will be quiet. You will give him no cause for suspicion. You will write to me from the moment you arrive, and you will write only what a respectable acquaintance would write, and you will do this for as long as it takes me to find what I already suspect is there. Because Sir Crispin Folksworth's first wife did not die in childbed. She stared at him. I have heard the rumor for 3 years. I never moved on it because I had no cause to. I have cause now. There is a midwife in Yorkshire who was paid to disappear. There is a physician in Bath who signed a certificate he should not have signed. There is a sister of the first wife who has not spoken her brother-in-law's name since the funeral. If any one of these threads holds, your marriage today will be void within 6 months. Not annulled. Void. As though it never occurred. A man cannot bind a second wife if his first wife was not lawfully released from him. And while I find out, I need you alive, and I need you safe, and I need you inside his house, where you can see what no one else can see. You are asking me, Marigold said slowly, to marry a man you suspect of murder, to live in his house, to spy on him for you. Yes. For how long? 3 months. 4. No longer than the summer. And if you are wrong? He looked at her, and she had never seen his face so naked. Then I will come for you anyway, and I will tear the kingdom apart to find another way. But I am not wrong, Marigold. I have been wrong about many things in my life. I am not wrong about this. She closed her eyes. She thought of her mother in the second pew with her white face. She thought of her brother at university. She thought of the 11 letters she had written by candlelight to the man standing in front of her, and how each one had ended begging him to come. He had come. He had come too late to stop the wedding. He had not come too late to stop the marriage. I have conditions, she said. His head came up. 3. First, you will write to me also from the moment I arrive, not as a respectable acquaintance, as a friend. I will not survive his house if I believe myself forgotten. Granted. Second, if at any moment I judge that I am in real danger of my life or worse, I will send you a single word, and you will come for me at once, and you will not wait for the canon law or any other proof. You will come. What word? Marchwood. Granted. Third, when this is over, if it ends as you hope, I will not be married to you out of obligation or gratitude. If you want me, you will court me from the beginning, the way you would have courted me last August if my letters had reached you, and you will let me say, no, if no is what I find when I am free. He was silent for so long, she thought he might refuse. Then he said very softly, Granted, with one amendment. What? I will court you from this hour. I will simply be obliged, for some months, to do it from a distance, through the wall of another man's house. I have already waited too long. The bishop's voice rose in the chapel. Your Grace, the bride is needed. Theron lifted her hand. He did not kiss it. He turned it over and pressed his palm flat against hers, fingers spread, the way 2 people press their hands together against a window pane when there is glass between them. Marchwood, he said. That word, and only that word. Promise me. I promise. Then go and marry him. She walked back out into the chapel on legs she could not feel, and somewhere in the back row, a woman in a dark blue cloak stood up very slowly and slipped out into the rain. The carriage that carried her to Greylinden Hall was lined in dove-gray velvet and smelled of someone else's perfume. Marigold sat with her hands folded in her lap and watched the wet hedgerow slide past the window. Sir Crispin sat opposite her. He had not spoken since the chapel. "You will be wondering, I imagine," he said at last, "whether I intend to ask you about the Duke." She had been wondering that for 40 miles. "I will not." He folded his gloves neatly across his knee. "I observed him. I observed you. I observed your father. The matter is closed. You are my wife, Lady Falksworth, and the past hour of this morning will not be referred to again, by either of us, in this carriage or in any other place. Do we understand each other?" "Yes." "Good." He smiled. It was a small civil smile, and it did not reach his eyes. "I have one further observation. You are an intelligent woman. I knew that when I asked for you. I prefer an intelligent wife. A foolish one is a misery to live with. However, an intelligent wife who imagines herself cleverer than her husband is also a misery to live with, and that misery falls more heavily upon her than upon him. I trust you will not require me to teach you the difference. Yes, good." He turned his face to the window. "We will arrive in 2 hours. You will find Mrs. Honeysett, the housekeeper, an admirable woman. She has served the estate for 31 years and has my complete confidence. I have engaged a lady's maid for you. Her name is Deepika. She came on the recommendation of Lady Marchmount, whose house I trust." The hedgerows kept sliding past. The rain slackened to a fine gray mist, then to nothing, and weak February sunlight broke across the hills. Greylenden Hall, when it appeared, sat in its valley the way a closed fist sits on a table, square and dark, and surrounded by yew hedges so high they hid the lower windows from the road. There were no gardens visible. There was no orchard. Mrs. Honeysett stood on the step in black bombazine. She was a woman of perhaps 60, with iron-gray hair drawn back so tightly it pulled at the corners of her eyes, and she curtsied to Sir Crispin first and to Marigold second, and the order of the curtsies was not lost on anyone. "My lady, welcome to Greylenden Hall." "Thank you. Deepika is laying out your evening dress. Sir Crispin keeps country hours. Dinner at 6. Mr. Locke, the steward, will wait upon you tomorrow morning. The chapel is on the south side of the house. Service is at 7 on Sunday mornings. Sir Crispin attends without exception." "I see. Thank you, Mrs. Honeysett. I should like to go to my rooms." The housekeeper led her up a wide stone staircase under the painted gaze of 3 generations of Falksworth ancestors, all of whom had the same long jaw and the same flat, watchful eyes. The room was on the 2nd floor, at the end of a long passage hung with hunting scenes. The door was opened from inside before Mrs. Honeysett touched the handle, and a young woman in a starched white apron stepped back and curtsied. "My lady, I am Deepika." She was perhaps Marigold's own age, with a serious oval face and very dark hair coiled neatly under her cap. Her English was precise. Her eyes, when Marigold met them, were not the eyes of a servant who had been in a great house for 30 years. They were the eyes of someone already taking the measure of her new mistress, and Marigold, who had been raised among servants and knew the difference, felt a small uncoiling of relief in her chest she did not understand, until later. "Thank you, Deepika. I should like to be alone for a quarter of an hour." "Yes, my lady." The 2 women withdrew. Marigold stood alone in the room that was now hers, looking at faded pink silk on the walls and a 4-poster of black walnut hung with rose-colored velvet, and a writing desk by the window, and an empty hearth, and a portrait above the mantel of a young woman in a high-waisted gown of pale yellow, holding a small white dog. She crossed the room and stood in front of the portrait. The name was painted on the lower edge of the frame in small gold letters. "Honoria Falksworth, born 1786, died 1810. The First Lady Foxworth had been very young, 24 at the most. She had a soft, round face and slightly anxious brown eyes, and a small mole at the corner of her mouth, and on the third finger of her left hand, she wore a wedding ring set with a single dark stone. Marigold's own hand now wore the same ring. Sir Crispin had slid it onto her finger at the altar 3 hours ago. She had been told the first wife had died in childbed in the autumn of 1810. The portrait gave a date of death only, no month, no season, and the woman in the painting, in her pale yellow gown with her small white dog, was not visibly with child. She turned to the writing desk. There was paper in the drawer. There was ink in the well. There was a fresh quill beside the standish, freshly cut, as though someone had prepared it for her arrival. She sat down. She drew a sheet of paper toward her. She dipped the quill. Your Grace, I am safely arrived at Greylinden Hall. Sir Crispin has been everything that is correct. The household is well appointed, and my lady's maid, a young woman called Deepika, seems competent and kind. I write only to assure you of my safe arrival. One small curiosity I will mention, since you are a lover of portraits. There is a painting of the First Lady Foxworth above the mantel in my dressing room. The lady is shown holding a small white dog. The frame bears her name and the year of her death, but no month. Should you ever chance to know the season of her death, I would be curious to learn it. The painting does not seem to me the painting of a woman expecting a child, though I am told she died of one. With my respectful regards, your obedient servant, Marigold Foxworth. She read it twice. She blew on the ink. She sealed it with a wafer and addressed it to His Grace the Duke of Marchwood at his London house, and she put it inside her glove. A soft knock came at the door. My lady, Sir Crispin has sent up to remind you that dinner is at 6. Come in, Deepika. The door opened. Deepika stepped inside. She closed the door behind her without being asked, and crossed the room and stopped beside the bed. My lady, she said, very low, I was sent to you by a woman in a dark blue cloak who attended your wedding this morning. She told me to tell you, when we were alone, 3 words. May I say them now? Marigold could not speak. She nodded. She is alive. The candle on the writing desk had burned to a stub by the time Marigold trusted herself to speak. Tell me everything. I cannot tell you everything, my lady. I do not know everything. I know only what I was told and what I have observed in this house since I arrived 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks? You came before me. Yes, I was placed. By whom? By the woman in the blue cloak. Her name is Aurelia Whitstone. She is the elder sister of the First Lady Foxworth. She paid for my passage from Calcutta 4 years ago when my father died. She found me a position with Lady Marchmount, who is her cousin. She arranged that my name be put forward when Sir Crispin inquired after a lady's maid for his new bride. He believes I came on Lady Marchmount's recommendation alone. And the First Lady Foxworth. Mrs. Whitstone believes she is alive. She has believed it for 8 years. In the autumn of 1810, Mrs. Whitstone received a letter from her sister, written from this house, dated the 3rd of October. Honoria Foxworth wrote that she was frightened of her husband, and that she suspected he meant her harm, and that if she should die before the year was out, her sister was to disbelieve any account of her death that involved a child, because she wasn't with child, and had never been with child during her marriage, and her husband knew it. The letter ended with the words, If I disappear, do not believe I am dead until you have seen me in the ground with your own eyes. Mrs. Whitstone received that letter on the 11th of October. On the 17th, she received a second letter from Sir Crispin, informing her that her sister had died in childbed 3 days earlier, and had been buried already in the family vault, by his order, because the season had been warm and there had been no time to delay. Marigold felt the cold of the room settle into her bones. She was not permitted to see the body. She was not permitted to attend the funeral. By the time she arrived, the vault had been sealed. 3 months ago, Mrs. Whitstone received a third letter, unsigned, posted from a small town in the north of Yorkshire. It contained only 6 words. What words? Your sister sends her love still. A log fell in the hearth, and Mrs. Whitstone believes her sister has been hidden somewhere these 8 years. She believes it. She cannot prove it. When she learned 2 months ago that Sir Crispin had betrothed himself to a young lady whose father was in difficulty, she understood she had run out of time. She could not warn you publicly, so she placed me beside you. And she sent word to His Grace, the Duke of Marchwood, because she has known these 3 years that he loved you, and she judged that he was the only man in England with the rank and the personal motive to act. She wrote to him, twice. The second letter she pressed into the hand of a porter at his London club this morning. She rode through the night to be at your wedding herself, in case you should refuse him. I did not refuse him. She rose from the writing desk. Her legs held her this time. She crossed to the mantel and looked up at the painted face. Deepika, if she is alive, then my marriage today is no marriage. No, my lady. Why did you wait until tonight to tell me? You have had 3 weeks to find a way to warn me before the wedding. Because Mrs. Whitstone instructed me you were to be told only after the wedding, and only after His Grace had spoken to you. A frightened bride who fled the altar would only have confirmed her father's ruin and her own destruction. A married woman, placed inside this house with a maid she could trust and a duke at her back, was the only configuration that gave her sister any chance of being found alive. She required me to wait. It was the right answer. There is a letter inside my glove. It is to His Grace. It must reach London tomorrow by the fastest post. Can you do this without Mrs. Honeysett knowing? Yes, my lady. There is a boy in the stables, the undergroom. His name is Pip. He owes me a favor. He will carry it himself to the next coaching inn and put it on the London mail. Marigold drew the letter from her glove. Take it. Hide it. Send it at first light. Deepika slid it inside the bodice of her dress. She curtsied. Will my lady require anything else? One thing. If Sir Crispin should send for me tonight, then I will tell him you are unwell. I will tell him this every night for as long as you require it. He will not press me. A man who values the appearance of patience cannot be seen to force a frightened bride on her wedding night. He will wait 3 nights, perhaps 4. After that, we will need another plan. Then we have 3 nights to think of one. Yes, my lady. A bell rang somewhere in the lower part of the house. Deepika went to the door, and at the door she paused. Mrs. Whitstone asked me to say one further thing. Her sister, when she was a girl, used to call her by a private name. The name was Leah. No one else has ever called her that. If you should hear that name spoken in any house, by any voice, you are to remember it, and to send word, and I will send word to her, and she will come. Leah. Leah, my lady. Good night. The door closed. Marigold stood alone, and somewhere 2 stories below her in this fist-shaped house, her husband sat at his writing desk, drinking the last of his hock, beginning a letter she would never read. She did not sleep that night. Around 2:30 in the morning, she heard the floorboard outside her door creak. She heard the breath of a figure who paused there for the space of 3 slow breaths, and then walked silently away down the passage. But she heard the floorboard. The first letter from His Grace arrived on the 4th morning, hidden inside a folded broadsheet from London, wedged between the 3rd and 4th pages of the Morning Chronicle. The newspaper had been delivered to the kitchen door by a man on a fast horse who did not give his name. Deepika brought it upstairs herself. The letter was short. My dear Lady Falksworth, I trust this finds you in good health. I write only on the small matter you raised in your last note. I have made inquiries, as a lover of portraits, into the painter you mentioned, and I am now reasonably certain the work is by the hand we suspected, though painted earlier than we supposed, perhaps in the spring of 1810 rather than the autumn. The season of the lady's death I have not yet been able to confirm, but I have written to a clergyman of my acquaintance in Yorkshire, who may have knowledge of the matter. I should know more within the fortnight. With affectionate remembrances to my sister, who sends hers, Marchwood. She read it slowly, the way a person reads a code. He had told her, in the only language they could safely use, that he had begun the work. The painter, meaning the lie, was older than they had thought. He had a man in Yorkshire. She would hear from him again within the fortnight, and she was not forgotten. She held the letter to the fire until it was ash, and crushed the ash with the poker. He had signed himself simply Marchwood, the single word she had named in the vestry, as her word of last resort. He had taken that word and turned it into his signature. He was telling her, in the only way he could, that he was carrying it with him every day. The days began to take a shape. Sir Crispin rose at 6, rode out across the home farm, returned at 9 for breakfast, retired to his study from 10 until 1, took luncheon with his wife, walked in the yew garden alone from 2 until 3, returned to his study, dined at 6, sat in the drawing room from 7 until 9, while he read aloud from a volume of sermons, and went to his own bedchamber at 10. He did not come to hers. Deepika had told him on the 3rd night that her ladyship was unwell. On the 5th night, Deepika had told him her ladyship's monthly courses had begun, and Sir Crispin had received this with the same measured smile he gave everything, and had said only, "Convey my hopes for her swift recovery." He was waiting in the way a man waits who has done this before. In the 2nd week, he began to take her with him to the chapel. The curate was a thin, pale young man called Mr. Branwell Otley, who read the lessons in a voice so soft it could not be heard from the 3rd pew, and who did not look at Marigold when she passed him at the door. Sunday by Sunday, she watched the curate's hands tremble on the edges of his prayer book, and understood, somewhere in the 2nd Sunday, that the curate of Grey Linden was afraid of her husband too. She made no move to speak with him. Not yet. In the 3rd week, Sir Crispin's sister came to dine. Her name was Mrs. Verena Drummond. She was perhaps 45, taller than her brother, with the same long jaw and flat, watchful eyes, and a thin mouth that smiled often without warming. She wore black silk and 3 rings of mourning, though Marigold could not discover for whom she mourned. She had come, she said, to welcome her new sister to the family. She watched Marigold throughout dinner, the way a hawk watches a small movement in long grass. "Tell me, Lady Falksworth, how does country life suit you?" "Very well, madam. I have a great deal more time to read." "And what do you read?" "The sermons of Bishop Beveridge at present." "At my brother's recommendation." "Yes. How dutiful." The smile did not warm. Honoria, you understand, wasn't a reader. She had no great mind. My brother was much disappointed in her. He values an intelligent wife. I am pleased he has found one this time. Marigold did not look at her husband. She felt his attention on her, like a hand on the back of her neck. I am sorry to hear that the First Lady Falksworth wasn't happy in her reading. I am told she was a woman of great gentleness. Who told you that? I do not recall, madam. It is the kind of thing one is told. By whom? The silence at the table was the silence of a room in which a small, sharp object has just been dropped onto a stone floor. Sir Crispin lifted his glass. He did not drink from it. "Verena," he said mildly, "my wife is very newly come into our family. She has heard, I am sure, only the kindest things from the kindest sources. Let us speak of pleasanter matters. Tell us how you found your sister in Bath." The conversation moved. After dinner, Mrs. Drummond didn't stay. She drank 1 cup of tea, kissed her brother on the cheek, kissed Marigold with lips that were perfectly cold, and got back into her chaise and drove away into the dusk. "My lady," Deepika said quietly behind her at the window. "I know. She came to look at me. She will be back." That night, Marigold wrote her second letter to Theron in the careful coded language they had begun to share. She mentioned the sermons. She mentioned the curate. She mentioned that her husband's sister had called and had asked who had told her ladyship that Honoria Falksworth was a woman of great gentleness. Pip the undergroom wrote it 12 miles before dawn to a coaching inn on the Great North Road, and 3 days later, it lay on the breakfast table of the Duke of Marchwood in Brook Street, London. And Theron read it standing up, did not finish his coffee, and went directly to his study to write out the names of 3 men he intended to send into Yorkshire by the end of the week. Around 2:30 in the morning, she heard the floorboard outside her door creak again, and this time she knew who it was. She got up. She walked silently to the door. She put her ear against the wood and listened, and the breathing on the other side listened back. They stood like that, the bride and her husband, with 1 inch of oak between them, for the space of a slow minute. Then Sir Crispin Falksworth turned and walked back down the passage to his own room. Marigold understood that her 3 nights had become 21, and that the next time he came, he might not turn away. The third letter from Theron came on a wet morning at the end of February, hidden inside the spine of a book. The book was a slim volume of the sermons of Jeremy Taylor, sent up with the household post and slid open by Sir Crispin himself in the breakfast room. He had glanced at the inscription on the flyleaf, to Lady Falksworth, with the compliments of the Duchess of Marchwood, who heard from her brother that her ladyship is studying the divines, and had handed it down the table without comment. He had not opened the book. It was only when Marigold sat at her writing desk that afternoon and turned the volume over in her hands that she felt the slight thickening of the spine, and only when Deepika eased the leather backing away that the folded slip of paper fell out into her lap. Theron's hand, smaller than usual. "My dear lady, 3 things, briefly. The clergyman in Yorkshire has been found. He keeps a small household in a village on the moors, 3 days' ride north of York, supported by a quarterly remittance from a London bank traced to an account in your husband's name. There is a woman in the upper rooms of his house who has not been seen in the village these 8 years, but who is heard. He tells the villagers she is his sister, mad, who must be kept from sight for her own sake. I have a man watching the house. I will not act yet, not until I have placed enough men around the village to be certain that, when we move, she cannot be moved first. Your husband's sister has been making inquiries in London this past fortnight after my recent activities. They suspect. Not yet what. Only that something. Do not write me again from the chamber if you can avoid it. There must be a corner of that house that no one watches. Find it. Write me from there. If at any moment you write the word we agreed upon, my horses will be out of London within the hour, and I will be at your gates within 2 days, and I will not stop for the law, or for the bishop, or for the king himself. Yours, Monsieur Marigold, read it twice. They burned it, and crushed the ash. 3 days' ride north of York. Then she is found. Almost found, my lady. Not with a clergyman who knows that the day she is taken from him is the day his own gallows is built. We must not frighten him. And my husband suspects nothing. My lady, I do not believe he suspects nothing. I believe he suspects always. He does not yet suspect his grace, or me, or the Yorkshire household. But he suspects you. He has not moved against you because he has not yet seen the proof he requires. Then we must find a corner of this house that no one watches. They began the next morning, slowly. Between them, over 4 days, they assembled a map of where the eyes of Grey Linden looked, and where they did not. The housekeeper's gaze fell on the chamber, the linen passages, the drawing room, the dining room, and the kitchens. It did not fall on the chapel. It did not fall on the small library at the south end of the house, which Sir Crispin himself never entered. It did not fall on the old conservatory beyond the chapel, kept locked and unheated, which the head gardener had told Depicted had not been opened in 7 years. It had been the First Lady's particular favorite. It had been closed up after she died, and the key kept in the housekeeper's parlor, and never asked for since. Get the key. It took Depicted 2 days. She did not steal it. She waited until the kitchen maid was sent to the linen presses, then asked the girl to fetch a particular pair of scissors from Mrs. Honeysett. Mrs. Honeysett, annoyed at being interrupted, gave the girl her keys and told her to fetch the scissors herself. Depicted, passing through the kitchen on a small errand of her own, took a single key from the ring and replaced it with one of similar weight from the spare keys in the gun room. 3 minutes' work. 6 weeks of patience to be ready for it. That afternoon, Marigold went walking in the yew garden, slowly, with a book in her hand. She turned at the fountain. She came back along the south wall of the chapel. And on this afternoon, she did not return to the house. She turned aside, into the narrow path between the chapel and the conservatory, and Depicted stepped out of the chapel door at the same moment. Depicted turned the key in the lock. The lock gave, and the door swung inwards, with a soft sigh of rust, and the smell of long dead things came out into the February air. The conservatory was almost dark. The orange trees stood in their great pots like black skeletons. There was a wrought iron bench against the inner wall, and Marigold went to it and sat down, and Depicted locked the door behind them, and they were, for the first time since Marigold had crossed the threshold of Grey Linden Hall, alone in a room that no one watched. Pen, paper. I have 3 minutes. Depicted produced both from her apron. Marigold wrote on her knee. She told Theron everything Depicted had said about the clergyman and the woman in the upper rooms. She told him about the inquiries in London. She told him she had found a room no one watched, and that from this hour she would write him from this room only. She signed the letter as he had signed his last. Yours, M. They stepped out into the gray light, and Marigold walked back to the house alone, along the south wall of the chapel. Sir Crispin was waiting in the entrance hall. My dear, you have been walking. Yes. In the yew garden, and reading. How pleasant. I have been thinking, my dear, that we have been a little too retiring these past weeks. I have written this morning to my sister. We will host a small gathering at Grey Linden in a fortnight's time. 20 guests. I have invited the Duke and Duchess of Marchwood, since I understand from my sister that the Duchess has shown an interest in your reading. I am certain they will refuse, but it would be uncivil not to ask. Will it not, my dear? Yes, Marigold said. Of course. He took her hand. He raised it to his lips. He kissed it slowly, and his lips were perfectly warm, and Marigold felt the floor tilt beneath her for the second time in 6 weeks, and she realized that her husband had just told her he knew exactly who had sent the volume of Jeremy Taylor, and that he was inviting Theron Ravenscar to dinner, and that he expected him to come. The fortnight before the dinner passed, in the slow, strange way that condemned weeks pass. Sir Crispin spoke of nothing else. He spoke of the menu with Mrs. Honeysett at breakfast. He spoke of the seating with his sister, who came down from her own house twice, and then took up residence in the green bedroom for the second week, ostensibly to advise on the housekeeping. In fact, to watch Marigold every hour she was not asleep. The invitation went out. No reply came back for 9 days. On the 10th day, a single sheet of cream paper arrived, sealed with the Marchwood arms. Sir Crispin opened it himself, read it once, folded it, and laid it down beside his plate. They will come, he said, and then he buttered his toast. He did not yet know about the first wife. He did not know about Yorkshire. He did not know about the clergyman or the woman in the upper rooms. If he had known any of those things, He would not have asked Theron to dinner. He would have done something quieter and crueler and out of sight. The dinner was the move of a man who suspected only that the Duke and the Duchess had a private interest in his wife. He was reaching for proof of an affair, not yet for proof of a murder. This was the only narrow margin she had. She wrote to Theron from the conservatory 4 times in those 14 days. He wrote to her 5. The letters were shorter now. 11 men by Friday. 14 by the following Monday. The bank has confirmed the account. The remittance for March was paid 2 days ago. No alarm has reached the village. The woman in the upper rooms was heard singing on Tuesday morning. She is alive, and not yet ill. Hold on, my lady. She held on. She held on through the fittings, and through the rehearsals of the table. She held on through the Sunday before the dinner, when she sat in the front pew and watched the curate fumble the lesson, and saw that his hand was shaking so badly he could not raise it without bracing it with the other. He looked at her once at the chapel door, and his eyes said something his mouth could not. She held on through the morning of the dinner itself. At 3, Deepika arranged her hair. At 4, the first carriages came up the drive. At 5, the entrance hall was full of fur cloaks and candlelight, and Sir Crispin stood at her side with his hand, at the small of her back, light and warm, and never moving. Theron and his sister arrived last, as a duke must. He bowed to her husband first, and to her second, and the bow he made to her was perfectly correct. His eyes, when they lifted from the floor to her face, were the eyes of a man who had spent the entire carriage ride from London, promising his sister he would not betray any of them. He kept the promise, through the drawing room, through the procession to the dining table, where Mrs. Drummond had placed him on Marigold's left, in the chair of greatest honor, through the soup, through the fish. He spoke to her of horses, of the road from London, of the recent debate in the Lords. He addressed her always as Lady Fawkesworth. He did not once look at her hand, where the first wife's ring sat on her finger. Sir Crispin watched him over the rim of his glass, and Sir Crispin's measured smile did not slip, but it did not deepen either, and Marigold realized that her husband was not getting what he had come for. The Duchess of Marchwood was helping. She was telling Sir Crispin a long, slightly funny story about a cousin in Hampshire. From the corner of her eye, Marigold saw the Duchess catch her brother's eye once, and the look between them was the look of 2 people who had agreed, in advance, on every move of the evening. The cloth was drawn. The ladies withdrew. The Duchess of Marchwood crossed the drawing room to her at once. "My dear Lady Fawkesworth, I have been wanting all evening to ask you about the conservatory. My brother says you have been restoring it. I should so love to see it before the gentlemen rejoin us. Would you walk me down? It is only a step." Mrs. Drummond's head turned sharply. The Duchess did not appear to notice. She had Marigold's hand already. "Of course," Marigold said. "I should fetch a shawl." "Deepika," the Duchess said without looking. "Would you bring her ladyship's grey shawl? Thank you." Deepika came back with the shawl in 2 minutes. The Duchess and Marigold walked out of the drawing room together, and Mrs. Drummond, after 1 frozen second, rose to follow. Deepika stepped, very gently, into her path. "Forgive me, madam. Mrs. Honeysett begs a moment. There is a question about the supper trays. It was beautifully done." Mrs. Drummond could not refuse a question from her brother's housekeeper without explaining herself in front of 20 witnesses, and she could not explain herself, and she stood very still in the drawing room, with her thin mouth slightly open. Deepika, who had not stopped to speak with Mrs. Honeysett at all, was already at the conservatory's small side door, with the key in her hand. The door was already open. Inside, in the pale February moonlight, Theron Ravenscar was already waiting. He had risen from the dinner table on the pretext of a sudden need for air, left by the garden door, walked the length of the south terrace alone, and let himself in at the conservatory's outer entrance, with a key the Duchess had pressed into his hand in the carriage. He had perhaps 4 minutes before Sir Crispin would notice. He used 3 of them. He took her face in both his hands, and he looked at her. And he did not kiss her, because they were not free yet. Marigold, listen. Everything is in place. We move on the first wife the night after tomorrow. 14 men. By the morning of the day after tomorrow, your husband's first wife will be in the protection of the Duchess of Carlisle, and a sworn affidavit will be in the hands of the bishop, and your marriage will be dust. I will come for you the same morning. You have to live until then. 2 more nights. Can you live 2 more nights? Yes. He suspects me. He suspects you of an affair. He does not yet suspect Yorkshire. Good. Then keep him on the affair. A triumphant man does not look elsewhere. I understand. Marigold, if anything goes wrong, if he comes to your door tomorrow night, if the maid is taken from you, if the conservatory key is found, you write the word. I will. He let her go. He stepped back. He bowed. Thank you, Lady Folksworth. I am much obliged to you for the indulgence of an old admirer of ruins. He turned and walked back through the garden door he had come in by, and was gone, and Marigold and the Duchess walked back through the chapel passage at a perfect saunter, and entered the drawing room at the same moment Theron entered the dining room from the terrace. Sir Crispin Folksworth, lifting his eyes from his glass, saw his wife on the Duchess's arm, coming through one door, and the Duke coming through another, and his measured smile, for the first time that night, deepened into something that was almost real. Marigold realized that her husband believed he had caught them, and that his belief was the only thing standing between her and the truth, and that she had to feed his belief for 2 more nights. She went to him at once. She let him kiss her hand. She did not look at Theron again for the rest of the evening. When the carriages left at midnight, Sir Crispin was still smiling. He came to her room that night. She had known he would. She and Deepika had not spoken of it as Deepika unpinned her hair and unhooked the dark blue gown, but they had moved with a particular slow care, the way 2 women move when they are arranging a room for a battle. Deepika set the candle on the writing desk, where its light would fall on the door, not on the bed. She drew the bed curtains halfway. She laid the poker against the inside of the hearth, so that the handle stood out by an inch. I will be in the dressing room, my lady. I will not sleep. Thank you, Deepika. My lady, the word. I know. He came at 1:30. She heard the floorboard, and this time he did not pause and walk away. He turned the handle. He came in. He was in his evening dress still, but he had taken off his coat, and the lace of his cuffs was undone, and he carried a single glass of brandy, which he set down very carefully on the table just inside the door, as though to free both hands. The measured smile was gone from his face, and what was beneath it she had not seen until tonight. My dear, Sir Crispin, you are not asleep. No. I am glad. He came towards her. He stopped 3 paces from her chair, and stood with his hands clasped loosely behind him, and looked down at her, and Marigold did not rise, because she did not trust her legs. You will have observed that I have been patient. Yes. I have been patient because I value an intelligent wife, and I have wished my wife to come to me of her own accord. I am not a man who has any taste for force. Thank you. However, the single word stopped her breath. However, I find that my patience has become, of late, the occasion of misunderstanding. I am not indifferent. I have known every step you have taken in this house from the morning of our wedding, and every letter you have written from this chamber, and every key you have caused to be lifted from my housekeeper's ring. I have permitted every one of these things because I wished to know, at the last, the shape of what I was permitting. She did not move. You will not pretend, my dear, that you do not understand me. No. Good. He took 1 step closer. This evening you walked with the Duchess of Marchwood to the conservatory. I believe the Duke of Marchwood was in that conservatory with you for some portion of the 4 minutes of his absence from the dining room, and I believe that what passed between you in those minutes is what I should call, were I in a court of law, sufficient. I have not yet decided whether I will require a court of law. The decision rests with you. I see. I have 2 courses open to me. The first will end with a duke disgraced in the Lords, with a young woman ruined in every drawing room of England, and with a father in the King's Bench prison for debts. I will be quite willing to call in. The second is the course of a husband who is satisfied, in private, by the conduct of his wife from this hour forward. A husband whose wife no longer writes letters to dukes, no longer entertains duchesses in conservatories, and no longer requires the assistance of foreign maids and stable boys. A husband whose wife attends to her husband as a wife should, beginning with this present hour, in this present room. Do you understand me? Yes. And which course do you choose? She rose. She set her hand on the back of the chair to support herself, and Sir Crispin watched her rise, and his measured smile began to come back, because he believed he knew what she was about to say. May I have the brandy, please? He had not expected that. The smile faltered, only for an instant, and then he said, Of course, my dear. And he turned away from her, half a step, to take up the glass from the table by the door. She had 3 seconds. She took 2 of them. She did not run for the poker. The poker was the second plan. The first plan was the writing desk. She turned, in the same motion with which she had risen, and she lifted the small bell that stood beside the inkstand, the bell Deepika had set there that afternoon, the bell that was not the chamber bell, but the dinner bell from the gun room, 3 times the size and weight, and she rang it once, hard, against the wood of the desk. The sound of it filled the chamber. It filled the passage outside. It filled the dressing room where Deepika was already on her feet, and the small room beyond, where Pip, the undergroom, smuggled into the house at 10 o'clock that night, had been waiting these 3 hours with a horse saddled in the stable yard. It filled the chapel passage where Mr. Branwell Otley, the curate of Grey Linden, had been writing a letter in the vestry for an hour because he had judged that tonight was the night he would finally write what he had not been permitted to say. He raised his head sharply and stood up. Sir Crispin turned back. His face had changed. What have you done? I have rung for my maid, and for the curate, and for the undergroom, and for the man waiting at the gate, whom his grace placed there 4 nights ago for precisely this hour. You have been observed, Sir Crispin, every night of the last fortnight, by men you have not seen. The bell I have just rung has been heard in 3 rooms of this house, and 1 outside it, and there is now a rider on the road to London. By midday tomorrow, his grace will know that I have called, and he will come for me, and you will not stop him, because you cannot stop a duke who comes for his betrothed with the bishop's affidavit in his hand. Affidavit. What affidavit? The affidavit of your first wife. The brandy glass slid from his fingers. It did not break. It rolled across the rug to the foot of the bed and stopped against the leg of it. She is alive, Sir Crispin. She has been alive for 8 years in a house in Yorkshire, in the keeping of a clergyman, whose name is known to me and whose accounts have been traced. By the morning of the day after tomorrow, she will be in the protection of the Duchess of Carlisle, and an affidavit signed in her own hand will be lodged with the bishop. My marriage to you is dust, Sir Crispin. It was dust the morning we made it. I am not your wife. I have never been your wife, and in 2 days, I will not even be your guest. The door of the dressing room opened. Deepika stood in it, with the poker in one hand and a folded paper in the other, and behind her in the passage stood the curate in his black coat, and behind him stood Pip, the undergroom, very pale, with his cap in his hands, and behind Pip stood a fourth man, broad-shouldered, in a dark riding coat, who said only, "Your Grace's compliments, my lady. The horses are ready." Sir Crispin Falksworth looked at the four of them. He looked at his wife. He did not move. "My lady, His Grace would have me say only one word to you, if you should require it. Marchwood. Marchwood, my lady. Then we ride." She did not look back at her husband. She walked past him to the door. Deepika fell in beside her with the poker. The curate fell in behind. Pip ran ahead with the candle. The man in the riding coat closed the door of the chamber behind them, and somewhere far away, in a small grey house on a Yorkshire moor, a woman who had not been called Leah in 8 years was being lifted into a closed carriage by men she had never seen. And she was crying, and she was laughing, and she was alive. They rode through the rest of the night. Marigold did not remember most of it afterwards. She remembered the chamber falling away behind her, and the dark of the chapel passage, and the cold of the stable yard, and the shape of the 4 horses in the lantern light. She remembered being lifted into a closed carriage by the broad-shouldered man, whose name, he told her quietly, was Captain Jago Penarvin, retired of His Majesty's 9th Light Dragoons, and presently in the private service of His Grace, the Duke of Marchwood. She remembered Pip running alongside the carriage to the gates of Greylindon, where he was caught up by another man on horseback, and given a fresh mount, and sent ahead at the gallop. She remembered the gates closing behind her in the dark, and she did not look back. They did not go to London. London was the obvious road, and the obvious road was the road Sir Crispin would send his men down within the hour. They went north, because north was where the first wife was, and Sir Crispin did not yet know that anyone in the world knew about the north. They drove 3 hours through the dark to a small posting inn called the 3 Crowns at Welbury. Marigold did not undress. She lay down with Deepika in a chair beside her, and she did not sleep. And at 6 o'clock in the morning, Captain Penarvin knocked once on the door. "My lady, there is news." She sat up at once. "Yorkshire is done. The clergyman is in irons. The lady is alive and in the carriage of the Duchess of Carlisle, who took her up at 4 o'clock this morning at the village inn at Easby, and is presently driving her south to Carlisle Castle. She came willingly the moment the Duchess named her. She is weak, but she is well. She has been kept in a single suite of rooms for 8 years, but she has not been ill-used. The clergyman fed her and gave her books and let her walk in a small walled garden twice a week. She has all her wits. She has, in fact, kept a journal." Marigold pressed her hand against her mouth. For 8 years. In small hand on the blank pages of the books the clergyman gave her. She wrote her own affidavit, "My lady," in that journal, in the form of a long letter to her sister, on the chance that anyone might one day read it. The Duchess of Carlisle has the journal. The bishop will have it by tomorrow night. And His Grace rode out of London at 4 o'clock this morning. He will be here at this inn by noon. He is sent ahead to say that he begs you will rest and eat and not stir from this room until he comes. He is further sent to say one other thing." "What?" Captain Penarvin cleared his throat. He looked, for the first time, faintly embarrassed. "He is sent to say, my lady, that the second of your 3 conditions has been honored, that the third remains in your gift, and that he is presently riding very fast in the hope of being permitted to begin upon the third." Marigold began to laugh, and then to cry, and then to laugh again, and Deepika sat down on the edge of the bed and put an arm around her, and Captain Penarvin, with the great tact of a former cavalryman, withdrew and closed the door, and Marigold cried into the shoulder of her maid for a long time, because she had not cried at all in the chamber at Greylindon Hall. and she had a great deal of crying owed. He came at 11:45. She heard the horses in the yard. She heard his voice in the passage. She rose from the chair by the window, and Deepika opened the door for him, and he came in his greatcoat and his riding boots, with the dust of the road on him, and he stopped 2 paces inside the room, and he looked at her as if he were not entirely certain she was real. Marigold. Theron. That was the whole of it. He crossed the room in 3 strides, and she was in his arms, and he was holding her with the kind of hold that doesn't let a person fall, and she was holding him back with the same hold, and neither of them spoke for some time. At last, he set her back from him. Did he? No. He came to my room. He talked. I rang the bell before he touched me. He never touched me. He closed his eyes. I am alive, she said. I am here. I rang the bell. Your bell. My bell, he said. My bell, my Marigold. He drew her back against him, and that time he kissed her. And the kiss was the first one. It was the first one because everything before it had been performance and concealment, and this kiss was neither. When he let her go, he sat down rather suddenly on the edge of the bed and put his head in his hands, and Marigold understood that he had not slept either. She sat down beside him. She did not speak. She let him have it. After a long time, he lifted his head. Sir Crispin will be arrested before the end of the day. The warrant left London at 6 this morning. His sister will not be charged, but she will not be received in any decent house in England again. The Yorkshire clergyman will answer for it. Your father, he paused. Tell me. Your father knew. She had known since the chapel. But to hear it said aloud was a different thing. Not the murder. Not the first wife being alive. He did not know there had ever been a question. But he knew, before the wedding, that Sir Crispin's first marriage had ended in circumstances some called dark, and he agreed to the match with that knowledge in his hand. Sir Crispin paid him £18,000 at the signing of the settlements, and forgave him a debt of 12,000 more. I am sorry. And my mother. Your mother knew nothing. She has been in Brook Street these 3 days, weeping at every post, in case there was news of you. She has refused to receive your father since the morning of the wedding. Marigold looked down at her hands. The wedding ring sat on her finger still. She lifted her hand and worked the ring slowly off and set it on the small table by the bed. It is dust. It is dust. The journey to Carlisle Castle took 2 days. They did not hurry. Theron traveled with her in the closed carriage, and Deepika traveled with them, and Captain Penarvin rode alongside. Theron sat opposite Marigold and did not touch her, because he had said in the inn parlor at Welbury that he would not court her while she was still legally bound to another man, and he meant it. They spoke instead. They spoke for 2 days. They spoke of the 7 months of letters, and the years before that, and the summer she had been 19. They spoke of his father, who had died in the first year of their separation, and her grandmother, who had died in the second. They spoke of horses, and of books, and of a particular kind of plum that grew in the orchard at Marchwood Park. By the time the towers of Carlisle Castle rose against the grey northern sky, Marigold understood that she had lost 3 years of his life, and gained them back inside one carriage. Aurelia Whitstone met them at the door of the castle. She was a small woman, smaller than Marigold had expected, with iron grey hair and the same anxious brown eyes Marigold had seen in the portrait above the mantel at Greylinden, 8 years older. She did not weep. She took both of Marigold's hands and held them for a long moment, and then she said, very quietly, "Thank you for ringing the bell. Where is she?" "In the yellow morning room. She has asked for you." The yellow morning room had a fire, and a small white dog, and a window that looked out over the river. The woman in the chair by the fire was 32 years old, and looked 40. and she rose when Marigold came in, and the dog rose too, and made a small, unhappy sound, and the woman put her hand down to quiet it, and looked across the room at the second wife of her husband, and the second wife of her husband looked back at her, and neither of them spoke for the space of perhaps 10 seconds. Then the First Lady Foxworth crossed the room and took Marigold's face in her hands and kissed her on the forehead and said, "Sister, welcome home." Marigold did not weep until she had been kissed. They stayed at Carlisle Castle for 8 days. The bishop signed the document at 20 minutes past 10 on the morning of the 8th day, exactly as Theron had promised. The marriage of Marigold Ashcombe to Sir Crispin Foxworth, contracted at St. Margaret's at Holcombe on the 1st of February, 1818, was declared void. Not annulled. Void. As though it had never occurred. The bishop kept the document. He gave Marigold a copy in his own hand. She walked out of the bishop's library on the morning of the 8th day, and Theron was waiting for her in the long stone passage with a small green leather case in his hand. "Lady Marigold Ashcombe, Your Grace, I asked you in the inn parlor at Welbury whether I might ask you again on the morning the bishop signed. You did. It is the morning the bishop signed." He went down on one knee in the long stone passage of Carlisle Castle, with the document in her hand and the small green leather case in his, and there were no witnesses except a pair of stone saints in a niche behind him, and the small white dog who had come along to see, and Aurelia Whitstone, who had come to the door of the bishop's library to see her sister come out, and who saw something else instead, and stopped, and said nothing. "Lady Marigold Ashcombe, I have loved you since the summer you were 19. I went to Scotland in the autumn of last year because I could not bear to be in the same country as you, and not court you, and I judged, foolishly, that absence would teach me something. It taught me nothing. While I was teaching myself nothing in Scotland, you were sold by your father to a man who had killed once and would have killed again. And I didn't come for you, because your letters did not reach me. I will not say I am sorry, because I am sorrier than any word I know. If you will have me, I will spend every day of my life that remains being the man who came when you rang the bell. Will you marry me? Yes. In the autumn. In the autumn. In a chapel of my choosing. Granted." He opened the small green leather case. The ring inside was not the ring that had sat on her finger for 6 weeks at Greylinden Hall. It was a thin band of gold with a single emerald, the color of summer leaves. And Marigold knew without asking that it had been his mother's. "With one amendment," he said. "What amendment?" "You will permit me, between this morning and the autumn, to court you." "Granted," she said, with great enthusiasm. He laughed. He stood up. He put the ring on her finger. He kissed her hand. He kissed her properly in front of the stone saints and the small white dog and Aurelia Whitstone, who at last allowed herself a smile, the first smile Marigold had seen on her face since they had met. The bells of the cathedral across the river rang the half-hour. They were not the bells of St. Margaret's. They were not the bells of any place that had hurt her. The wedding was not in late autumn. It was in early autumn, the second week of October, on a bright, cold morning with leaves blowing across the path between the lych gate and the chapel door. And it was held in the small gray chapel at the edge of the home park at Marchwood, in a garden Marigold remembered from a summer afternoon when she was 19. She had insisted on a small gathering. Theron had wanted to give her a great one. She had said she had been the center of a ceremony in front of 200 people once, in February, and that she had not cared for the experience, and that this time she wanted only the people she could name, and could thank by name, and could see when she turned her head from the altar. She named them, her mother, her brother, who had been told everything in the spring, and had arrived at Marchwood 3 weeks before the wedding, and had not been able to look his sister in the eye for the first 2 days, until she had taken him by the shoulders in the long gallery and told him that he wasn't his father and was not required to be his father. He had wept then, and after that, he had been able to look at her again. The Duchess of Marchwood and her husband, who had come from the north for the occasion. Aurelia Whitstone, who had at last consented to be called Aurelia, and who arrived in a pelisse of dark blue silk that was not the color of mourning. The former Lady Falksworth, who now signed her name as Honoria Whitstone, and who had brought the small white dog. Captain Jago Penarvin, in his old regimentals, looking embarrassed about it. The curate Mr. Branwell Otley, who had been given a living of his own in Sussex by the Duke of Marchwood, and who was no longer afraid of anyone, and who had come up to read the lesson, which he read in a voice that could be heard quite clearly from the third pew. Pip, the undergroom, who had been promoted to head groom at Marchwood Park, and was rather grand about it. And Deepika, who had come up from her school in Bristol, where she had 31 girls and an annuity from Aurelia Whitstone, and who had said when Marigold asked that she would not have missed it. The ceremony was performed by a bishop who had not signed any document concerning her in his life. He read the lines slowly, and Theron said the words slowly, and Marigold said the words slowly, and when the bishop pronounced them man and wife, there was a long moment in which Marigold did not speak, because she was remembering the last time she had stood before an altar, and the doors that had crashed open behind her, and the man who had walked down the long aisle in the rain. She turned her head, very slightly, and looked at the chapel doors. They were closed. They were not going to open. There was no one coming who had not already come. She turned back to her husband, and he was watching her, because he had known what she was looking at. "It is closed," he said, very quietly, only for her. "It is closed." He kissed her. Outside in the autumn sun, the bells of the small gray chapel began to ring, and they were not the bells of St. Margaret's, and they were not the bells of any place that had hurt her. The wedding breakfast was held in the long gallery at Marchwood. Captain Penarvin rose and gave a short, dignified, and very nearly inaudible speech in which he referred to His Grace as the finest commanding officer I have served under, in either uniform or coat, and then sat down very quickly and refused to look at anyone for 10 minutes. Marigold's brother gave a longer speech, which was not a speech so much as a sustained apology, which Marigold cut short by walking down the long table and kissing him on the top of the head. Aurelia Whitstone did not speak. She watched her sister, who was sitting beside her and eating a great deal of cake, and Marigold caught her eye once across the table, and Aurelia at last smiled the smile that had been waiting in her since the bishop's library. In the late afternoon, when the guests had gone or had been put to bed, Theron took his wife by the hand and walked her down through the home park to the chapel again, alone, because she had said the night before that she wanted to see it once, when it was empty. They sat in the pew where her mother had sat at the wedding, and they did not speak for some time. "Theron." "Yes." "Do you know what I think of when I think of February now? Tell me." "I think of the sound of the doors opening, not closing. Opening. I think of the sound of you coming in." He took her hand. Then he said, "I think of the sound of a bell. My bell. Your bell. My Marigold." They walked back to the house through the lengthening light, and the dogs came out to meet them on the gravel sweep, and somewhere across the park, the bells of the village church began to ring 6 o'clock, and Marigold stopped on the gravel sweep and lifted her face to the sound and counted every chime, because every chime was an evening she had not believed, in February of the year she was 21, that she would ever be alive to hear. 3 years passed. Marchwood Park, in the third autumn after the wedding, was the kind of house that had stopped being grand and had become, instead, lived in. There were dogs in the long gallery. There were children's drawings pinned to the back of the stillroom door. There were 2 small pairs of muddy boots on the boot scraper at the garden entrance, and there was a third, considerably larger, which belonged to Captain Penarvin, who came to stay every September for the partridge shooting, and stayed, by long-established habit, until the first frost. The 2 small pairs of boots belonged to a boy of 2 and a girl just turned 1. The boy was called Owen. The girl was called Aurelia, after the woman of Carlisle, who had stood as her godmother and who had wept for the first and only time in her life, in public, on the day of the christening. Honoria Whitstone lived at Carlisle still, in her sister's house, and had not married, and had not wanted to. She kept bees. She wrote, very slowly, the book of her 8 years, which she did not show to anyone, but which she said she was writing for the woman she had been at 24. Honoria came to Marchwood every Christmas. The small white dog had died in the 2nd year, and a new white dog of similar disposition and lesser intelligence sat on her lap by the fire each Christmas and was much petted by the children. Deepika ran her school in Bristol. She had 31 girls in the 1st year, and 42 in the 2nd, and 57 in the 3rd. She wrote to Marigold every fortnight. She had not married, and said she did not intend to. Mrs. Drummond had retired to Bath, where she lived in 2 rooms above a milliner's, and wasn't received. Sir Crispin had died at sea on the voyage to New South Wales of a fever in the 2nd year of his transportation. Marigold had been told of the death by a letter from the Colonial Office, and had folded it and placed it in the small box where she kept the few things from that February, and had not opened the box again. The box also held the wedding ring she had set on the table at the 3 Crowns at Welbury. She had not worn it. She had not thrown it away. On the 3rd anniversary of the autumn wedding, Theron and Marigold rode out together at dawn to the small grey chapel where they had been married. They went alone. They tied the horses at the Lich Gate and walked up the path together in the half-light, and sat in the chapel for a quarter of an hour, and they did not speak much. When they came out, the sun was coming up over the down behind the chapel. Theron. Yes. I have been thinking this morning about February. Tell me. I do not think of the chapel anymore. I thought, in the 1st year, that I would always think of the chapel. I thought, in the 2nd year, that I would always think of the carriage to Grey Linden. But this year, when I thought about February, I thought only of the vestry, of the moment when you asked me to trust you for 3 months. I have been thinking that I was given, in that moment, the most important thing anyone has ever given me. I was given a choice. I had not been given one before. My father did not give me one. Sir Crispin did not give me one. You did. And the decision was mine. And every morning since has been built on that decision. I wanted you to know that. He did not answer for a long time. When he did, his voice was rougher than she had ever heard it. My Marigold. Yes, I think of the bell. I think of the moment when it rang. And I thank God every day that you are the kind of woman who, when she is given 3 seconds in a room with a man like that, takes 2 of them and uses them to ring the bell. You have always been the one who chose. You chose to write to me for 7 months when no answer came back. You chose to walk into the vestry. You chose to marry him because I asked you to. And you chose to leave him because I could not get there in time to do it for you. You rang the bell. I only came when it rang. She did not speak. She put her hand inside his, fingers spread, and he pressed his palm flat against hers. They walked back to the Lich Gate and untied the horses and rode home through the lifting mist, and the day became the day, and the children were waiting on the gravel sweep when they came up the drive, and Owen was carrying a frog in a jar, and Aurelia had put on her father's hat, which came down to her chin, and Captain Penarvin was standing on the steps, holding the dogs back with one hand and a cup of coffee in the other, and the bells of the village church across the park began to ring 8 o'clock, and Marigold, pulling her horse up at the foot of the steps, lifted her face to the sound and listened to it the whole way through, and counted every chime because every chime was a morning she had not believed, in February of the year she was 21, that she would ever be alive to hear. Thank you for being here, and for staying with Marigold and Theron all the way to the end of their long road home. You are why these stories are written. You are the reason a young woman in a cream silk gown, standing at the wrong altar in February, is permitted to walk out again into autumn sunlight 3 years later, with a frog-catching son and a hat-wearing daughter and a husband who came when she rang the bell. Without listeners who believe in love that is patient and love that is brave, a story like this would have no place to go. If a particular scene moved you, I would love to know. Was it the moment in the vestry when he asked her to trust him for 3 months? Was it the conservatory and the orange trees? Was it the night of the dinner, the bell, and the 4 faces in the passage? Was it Honoria taking her face in her hands and saying, "Sister, welcome home"? Tell me. Your words help shape what comes next. If you would like more stories of this kind, stories with real danger, real tenderness, and endings that are earned rather than given, please consider subscribing so that the next one finds you when it is ready. Thank you, again, for being here. You are the reason this place is warm. Until the next story, take care of yourself, and remember, when the doors seem closed, ring the bell.